Welcome to the UnCeiling You podcast. I'm Dr. Natalie Luke, and today we're going somewhere where most leadership conversations never go. Not how to produce more, not how to delegate better, not how to meditate through burnout. Today, we're talking about what happens to your thinking, the actual cognitive function inside of you when the pressure is real, and why that matters even more now that we have a machine that will think for us if we let it. And here's the honest truth that I've been sitting with. The trust tax, the invisible premium that capable people pay in organizations that route everything their way. It isn't about workload. It isn't about the hours. It's about what happens to your thinking when you've been carrying too long. You stop owning your conclusions. You start outsourcing your judgment. And most of the time, you don't even know it's happening. That's the conversation today. My guest today is Pav Lertjitbanjong, a decision scientist, former head of strategic analytics at Fortune 500 companies, and someone who has spent over 20 years watching what happens to smart, capable leaders when the pressure gets real. She's survived more than 15 restructurings without being let go, and she knows exactly what's required. She's also the person who made me realize that we were outsourcing our thinking long before AI showed up. We were giving it away to our bosses, to our roles, and to what success was supposed to look like. You're listening to the UnCeiling You podcast. Let's get into it. Pav, you talk about AI making people worse thinkers. What have they actually been outsourcing when they've outsourced their thoughts well before AI came into play?
Yes, and that's such a great question, Natalie. So basically there's a concept, two ways that you can use AI, right? Like a lot of people are using AI as a thinking partner, which is great. And, that's the way that we're supposed to be doing, because when you use AI as a thinking partner, because it challenges you. But then, however, there are a lot of us that are still using AI as an answer machine. And that's how I call this outsourcing your thinking. Because when you use AI as an answer machine versus a thinking partner, you basically let AI replaces you.
Can you maybe give me an example of using AI as a thinking machine versus an AI as an answer generation machine?
Yeah, so when you use AI as a thinking partner, you actually think along with AI. As in, you don't just accept, okay, like here's my question and this is AI's output, and then you use that as your own thinking and make a conclusion or recommendation based on exactly what AI is saying. But when you are using AI as an answer machine, is basically you ask question and then AI split out the answer for you, and that's how. Okay, here's my recommendation. But the worst part, though, Natalie, is when you go to a boardroom to your boss and they starting to challenge you, then you go, let me go back and ask AI because you don't own that thinking yourself.
What Pav just described, giving your thinking to your boss, to your title, to expectations, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because in my work with high performers, this is exactly where the trust tax starts. Not in the workload, in the moment you stop trusting your own read of the room. The system learns that you will catch what falls, and quietly, without a meeting or a memo, it starts routing everything your way. But here's what I didn't understand for a long time. The system doesn't just take your time. It takes a version of you that thinks for herself. You become the person who executes, who delivers, who catches. But somewhere in there, you stopped asking, what do I actually think about this? That's not a willpower problem. That's a design problem. Design problems, unlike character flaws, they can be fixed. Yeah. So is that the best way to know? And I'd hate to find out when I go to my boss and they're asking me questions and I don't have the answers. How does someone actually know when they are using AI as an answer generating machine?
Yeah, so I would say, Natalie, because ownership means two things. So one is you know that it's right because you already have a hypothesis, and AI helps you confirm that hypothesis based on all these different assumptions or conclusion. And then the second one is you know what would change your view. And again, like that's back to you already know your hypothesis, so then you know that if there are new information coming in, then there could be certain things, certain criteria that change your view. So I think these are the two important things. And most people in corporate were trained to argue, like, and basically be the first to hide when somebody suddenly questioned them. So this is part of the think protocol that I teach, and this is the H step, basically hypothesize first. So you need to hypothesize first, and this is like literally an exercise of remembering what you actually think at first.
Okay. So you have a framework to helping people understand how to actually think first so that they're using AI as a thinking partner. In what ways would using that hypothesis and using AI as your thinking partner really help? Because most people feel they're high functioning on the surface when they're generating these answers.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you something first, Natalie. Have you ever used AI to write something like, an email or a post or a plan? And then suddenly, like I kind of touched on a little bit, like somebody asked you for a follow-up question and you went slightly blank, right?
Yeah. So there have been times and it was embarrassing, I have to say. It's like, wait, I should have thought of that.
Exactly. And let me just tell you a story before I answer the question. So last summer, I went to a wedding, and it was like a really nice wedding, 40 people, and then one of the best men in the wedding was giving a speech, and then he's starting really, really beautifully, like, oh, hey, let's raise glasses for our beautiful brides and groom, blah 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 blah. And then suddenly he started to kind of spit out what ChatGPT would say, like, certainly here is blah blah blah, beautiful wedding message that you can talk to you can take. Like, exactly, he was saying that. And can you imagine like how embarrassing that is? But that is the amount of how people let AI dictate their own thought, because we are now trained to not just think, but also memorize the output that we get from AI, which is like the worst thing that could have ever happened.
The wedding speech, it's sort of funny until you realize you've done a version of it yourself. You use the AI written summary in the meeting, and when someone asked a follow-up question, something flickered. A half second of blank space where your own thinking should have been. Here's where the trust tax and borrowed thinking have in common. Both of them work invisibly. The organization doesn't announce it's routing more your way. AI doesn't announce it's replacing your judgment. They both just do it quietly until one day the load is different than what you agreed to and your thinking is different than what you built. The antidote is the same in both cases. You have to name what's happening before you can redesign around it. Language is the lever. You cannot redesign what was never described. What happened in that moment? Like, did he realize or snap out of it? Like, whoa.
I mean, after he spoke like a full 1.5 sentence, and he's like, what just happened? And everybody was, I didn't know what to say, imagine like that could be any one of us in a boardroom or in a meeting. Hopefully not that we would catch that glitch earlier. But this is how AI has basically be embedded in our everyday's life, and without training your thinking, it is so dangerous,
Yeah.
on the path that we are heading to.
Got you. So I think, making sure that you're using AI as a thinking partner versus an answer generation machine is everything. So how does someone really show up differently that feels real when they're using AI as that thinking partner? And how do you make sure that you're using it as a thinking partner? The example you gave is a super one. Are there any ones that you see that are showing up in a boardroom or in a meeting that's really critical?
I think like the one that maybe that I could elaborate more was when I just touched about how when you get put on the spot, you can't really explain your own thinking. And I think that is probably like a very critical one that is happening in real time these days. Yes.
I could see where people also do this in terms of, hey, I've been told to execute on this particular project, and I understand that the strategy is this, and where we're trying to get to is this. I just need to do it and get it done. And so they've actually started to give their thinking away from their boss. How do we actually start to gain more confidence in our own thinking as opposed to just releasing our thinking to other people and
Yeah.
things, machines?
Exactly. So I have this 5-step of think protocol. So basically, this is kind of like the framework that I came up with, based on decision science, on like how you can actually start to regaining your control. And you can actually use this framework when it comes to thinking with or without AI. So first step is a T. So T is tune in. So basically, this is what we would regulate before we actually use AI, or even like before we start making a decision or recommendation or frame a hypothesis. You would start regulating, and it just takes like less than 60 seconds, just through breathing, or sometimes like for me, it just kind of just move my body around just to feel like, okay, I'm owning this space, I'm owning this room, and just to kind of get my blood going from, in my brain and my body and so on and so forth. So that's the first step. And then H stand for hypothesis first, which we kind of touched a little bit, Natalie, earlier. So hypothesis first is like, this is the one that pretty much changes everything. And I would say, because before AI see your task, or like before you write down your prompt to AI, you use your gut, like your initial direction, to tell them like, hey, instead of saying, I have this question, please give me answer. But when you form a hypothesis, it actually makes AI smarter and know like the direction that you actually want to go to, so that it can go in and then try to frame the answer around that hypothesis. And I know like some people might say, but when you give hypothesis first, you can actually bias AI. But can you imagine without giving hypothesis or even like context, for example, AI would just grab, a little bit here and there, and who knows, like where all these information are coming from. And we already know like the case of AI hallucination is happening today. So hypothesis first is very important. And then the third step is I. So I stand for interrogate everything. And I would say like this is maybe a more decision scientist in me, that you trust but you verify, right? So you read what AI gives you, but before you actually trust it, you ask, right? Like, for example, what assumption did you make? That I never stated. Because oftentimes, again, like back to the AI hallucination, you didn't really say much, and then AI already gave you such elaborate answer, and even like some research information. And I would say, sorry, ChatGPT, but it's much worse for ChatGPT than Claude. But even Claude these days makes this mistake. For example, when I try to write an article, I use AI just like everybody, and then I just post, okay, like here's my topic, this is my hypothesis framework and assumptions, and then ChatGPT would just go, or now Claude would go into the deep end and try to answer my question, and then give me stats and facts. But then when I look at, it doesn't really look right? And then you call it out, like, hey, where did you get that fact from? And then it's like, oh, I'm sorry. We actually got this mixed up. So you have to interrogate everything these days to make sure. Because bottom line is, when we talk about owning your own output, like AI is not going to be the one in the boardroom, in the meetings to say that, hey, this is my answer and I take responsibility. I messed up. It is you. It is us. So we just need to make sure that we check the work before. And N is narrow to the call. So basically, narrow to the call is AI gives you different options, and that is beautiful, very well reasoned and all that. But your job is not to present the options. Like your job is to make the call. And I actually got a chance to talk to a head of AI in one of like the Fortune 10, I can't name the name, but I asked outright what he thinks that, now that we outsource so much of the output to AI and all these different tasks to AI, like what is left to human? And he outright just told me that is the thinking, is the decision. Because at his company, for example, even if AI helps makes like pre-decision or give you all these different options, but human is still the one that's making the call. So they still have like a real human committee that actually are making the judgment. And that is, narrowing the call. So we just need to make sure that we exercise our own judgment when it comes to AI output. And the last one, K, which is basically tie all this together in the think protocol, is that you know how to land it. And by that, I say when you present this, you just need to, make sure that we are clear on what we are recommending, right? And, it's just like, make sure that you put conclusion first, and then you have the reasoning to support your decision and tie that together.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So I do use AI regularly to do research. And so just hearkening back to some of the things that you've said, there are times when with the hallucination, I will say, hey, I need 5 references that speak to this particular problem and gives me data. And I need to know what that data says. And I'm like, and I want the references. So then I'll go back and read the papers.
Yeah.
That
Where
paper is not even about the topic you just said it was about.
Exactly.
And I have to be nice to AI. I feel like I should be nice to AI because it's kind of nice to me. It says, so I'm like, I'm sorry, I believe you're mistaken.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you a leader who wants more wins in your business? Listen to the award-winning Executive Wins podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so that you can get inspired and grow your business. Wins include scaling multi-million-dollar businesses, thriving after bankruptcy, gaining clarity in an ambulance, and more. In every episode, host Gordon Shepherd explores the anatomy of a win, so you can learn the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind every win you hear on the show. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit executivewins.com/podcast to learn more.
And actually, what's funny is, Natalie, so, okay, don't quote me on this, but I read it somewhere saying that Sam Altman are not blaming people, but literally saying that it cost him so much money by people being nice to AI and say thank you, for example, because that takes like 1 extra prompt or more. So like the more you say, the more we are being nice to AI is actually costing the AI companies. But I totally believe in being nice. So yes.
That is so funny. Now, let's talk a little bit about pressure, because you're in the hot seat and that pressure can cause you to take on things that you shouldn't take on or commit to actions that you don't need to commit. And this is where things tend to break down, especially for the high producing person. Because even when people do know what they think, they often sometimes can't say it. You talk about biology, the biology of authority, which is an interesting concept, I have to say. And I think it's the part that most people miss. What's actually happening in the body when someone knows the answer, but they think they don't know the answer and they don't speak up?
Yeah. So that's just research basically by Yale University saying that under high stakes pressure, your IQ actually dropped by between like 10 to 15 points. So it's literally kind of like you haven't been sleeping all night. So someone who is so capable, smart under a normal circumstance, under pressure, they could act differently. So when you were asking what happened to the body, so for example, it could show up in many different ways. It could show up in your breathing. You might be breathing fast. You could be maybe, your hands kind of shaking a little bit and your body temperature could turn cold or turn hot. There are 4 different what I call glitches that could happen. So under pressure, you could freeze, as in your mind goes blank, like what you just mentioned, or you could start to ramble, and then you can snap or you can shrink. And I think like each one of us has a signature glitch. And for me, I would say I'm all 4, but my signature is shrinking. So when you start being more mindful and aware of your glitch even before it happens, and that's part of biology of authority, is to catch that glitch before it happens so that you can actually course correct it before things happen and just mind goes blank in meetings.
Here's what got me when Pav described the 4 glitches. The most dangerous burnout doesn't look like burnout. It looked like success. The person is still in the role, still delivering, still the one everyone calls. But inside, the glitch is running. They froze in the meeting, papered it with competence. They rambled through the answer, and nobody noticed because they've trained everyone to trust them. They shrank, gave their seat at the table to the loudest voice, and called it being a team player. The trust tax doesn't just take your bandwidth. It takes your nervous system. You are operating in a body that's been on high alert for so long that start to feel like your baseline. That's not a mindset problem. That is a structural problem. The structure creates the load changes the biology, and no amount of box breathing fixes a system that keeps refilling the box. That makes a lot of sense. So for most people that know me, they know I play tennis, and I have the wonderful gift of being able to take tennis lessons from a coach who coaches a men's college national, college Division I tennis team. I think they're they're Division II. But in any case, they're national champions. And one of the things that he talks about is that when you go out to play tennis, you have your high level of play, you have your low level of play. And to become a better tennis player, what you want to do is take your lower level and raise it up. You don't try to take your higher level and raise it up. That's kind of hard. You just take that lower level and raise it up. And I kind of hear you saying the same thing in the sense that under pressure, something's going to happen. In tennis, you can be under pressure like when you're just about ready to win and you need to just get that extra 1 point. That's pressure. You can be under pressure when you're losing by a lot and you have to catch up. You can be under pressure in a lot of different situations. And his message was, know when you're under pressure and have a plan as to what to do when you're under pressure. And that takes your lower level and raises it up. So for those people that they have those glitches. I know I'm going to do this. I know I'm going to do that. I'm going to shrink. I'm going to not breathe. I'm going to something when they're under pressure. What advice do you have for them to help raise that up so they're not like operating as if they didn't sleep all night?
Yeah. So two things that comes to mind. So the first one is just like when you were mentioning about the tennis example. So what has really anchored me and also surprises me at the same time was that leadership is one of the high stakes fields that we don't really have, how do I call that? No, like pressure training, right? So for example, like in tennis, in sports, you actually have the training, or in medicine, you before a doctor goes in and do a surgery, they would do it over and over again on like a prep. So, but for us, basically, we just expect to just take a cup of coffee and just get ready for a fire drill every day. That's how it works. So nervous system regulation by desensitizing your nervous system to the point that make the chaos become normal. That's very important. And the only way to train this is just to keep doing things that, kind of expose your nervous system over and over and over again. And the easiest way to do that is, okay, think about like when you go into a meeting and then we wanted to say something, we have something that we wanted to say, but a lot of us don't want to say it, don't want to be the first one to ask questions or be the first one to say something. Like, why not train your nervous system by just, every day or just like once a week, be that first person to raise your hand. And you don't have to say the smartest thing, but by that, you're actually automatically training your nervous system to say that, okay, by being the first or by speaking up, this is actually a safe space. So that's...
Pav's Think protocol starts with a hypothesis. You form your own view before you open AI, before you walk in the room, before you look for external confirmation. In my framework, I call the equivalent of this your lane. Before you observe the work that lands on your desk, you ask, is this actually mine? Was this formally decided, or did it just land on my desk quietly over time because the system found the path of least resistance? And that path ran straight through you. Both frameworks are asking the same question in different rooms. Do you know what you actually think before the room decides for you? That's not arrogance, that's ownership. And it's the first thing that goes when the trust tax gets heavy. Yeah. So I'm thinking about that also. So that's the person that's trying to step up and get out of their shell. For the person that is already a high responsible person and is maybe taking on too much, maybe what are some actions they can do? Because they will step up and take on something as opposed to trying to figure out the best people to actually take on something. What can they do to expose their nervous system?
Yes. So one thing that I do every time that I go into important meeting is so simple that sometimes people, when I tell people, it's like, really, is that all it takes? Is you start breathing, but it's not just any kind of breathing. So one of my favorite breathing is called 4-4-4-4 box breathing, which is used well known in the military, or people who are first responders are actually using this. So essentially, you breathe for 4 seconds, you inhale, and then another 4 seconds, you hold your breath, and then you exhale for 4 seconds and do it 4 times. And that in itself actually helps to bring your prefrontal cortex, or the CEO brain, back online. And also, even in meetings, obviously you can't really go in for a full-blown 4-4-4 box breathing. We can just use simple grounding technique. For example, when you're in a meeting and you're about to present, when you put your hands on something solid, or your feet on something solid, on the ground, right? Because sometimes when we sit down, lots of people just, tend to have different posture. But when you start putting your feet on the ground, putting your hands on the ground, it actually trigger your nervous system to kind of sense that, okay, like this is safe. I have something to actually ground myself. And, it's really easier to help regulate that way.
Nice. And I think that's, like you said earlier, it's important because you're thinking under pressure, it doesn't matter how smart you are. If you're not having access to your full brain, things will stall out for you. Now, you've been in something like 27,000 high-stake meetings. And you've gone through over 15 restructurings where you were never let go. And most people assume that's performance. What actually protected you?
Yes. And by the way, the 27,000 is more like my calculation on like, okay, for each day, here's number of meetings that I'm attending, and for how many days a year that I actually are working. So that's just to kind of give you some background. So in terms of the whole like layoff and restructuring, I would say, so, Natalie, I would say like there are two types of people that I've seen staying and not being let go. But these days and age, who knows, so many things can change and have changes. But there were two types of people. Like one are the people who are always like the yes sayers, right? So like when the boss is saying, do this, they just go say yes. They're very obedient and they know how to work the systems and they tend to survive. But then there's also the second ones that are the people who kept their seats. They might not be the smartest people in the room, but they actually, back to what we were saying, they actually regulate it. So under pressure, when things happen, they are the one who actually keep the shite together at work. And obviously leadership can tell, like, here's the person that we need to keep versus the one that's not. But like I said, is not an all be all that it has to be like these two types of people. But this is kind of like the trend that I've been seeing. So for me, I like to think that I'm the second type of person that is regulated, but at the same time, like realistically, I would say I'm a blend of both. And in corporate, we have been trained that you have to follow certain rules, and then there are certain people that you need to make sure that you answer to, and so on and so forth. So there's a underlining unspoken corporate rules that you have to follow, and some people just doing that better than others.
Yeah. So what do you think people keep getting wrong when it makes someone irreplaceable?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So first of all, the first instinct is to list qualities, right? Like judgment, presence, and the relationships. But at the same time, I want to be clear that by being irreplaceable is actually not a goal. And I love to hear your thoughts on this, Natalie. And the reason I say that is because being irreplaceable is how your listeners, for example, got here. As in like being a high achiever, being the one who can't be cut, and stay and be the responsible one. But this is actually where you get more work. And you have to be more of a yes person. So that's a double-edged sword on, being irreplaceable. However, there's a different things. I would say the goal would be more of being impossible to ignore, because when you are impossible to ignore, you don't need to be irreplaceable, because people already know, like, once Natalie shows up, like, this is the person that we listen to. She's the one that we trust the judgment. And I think ultimately, no matter whether you stay in the current company or next company, there's always a place for you, because you are impossible to ignore. And to do that, you think clearly and you speak with authority, and that's what leads to that.
Most of the women I work with have been chasing irreplaceable without realizing it's a trap. When you become irreplaceable, the system stops investing in anyone else. The informal organization chart rewrites itself around you, and the system has no incentive to change because you're covering everything it should have been designed for. Impossible to ignore is different. Impossible to ignore means your thinking is clear, Your judgment is so sound, your ownership is so direct that the system has to reckon with you, not extract from you, reckon with you. That's what the responsibility reset actually builds. Not the ability to carry more, the ability to be clearly seen for what you actually bring. So the system builds around your strength instead of running on it. That's the ceiling moving. I think that is the mic drop moment that we need to pay attention to right there. It's not about being irreplaceable. It's about being impossible to ignore, and thinking clearly is what that's all about, especially under pressure. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation before we end?
So I would say one thing that I would love to leave. Actually, maybe two things. So first thing is, the reason that I'm doing all this is because I believe that power is safer in hands of those who are regulated and trained and good-hearted. And I'm sure this is also part of why you are creating this podcast, to make sure that people who are good-hearted and are capable can rise above. And I think the last one is, the most regulated person wins. Most of the time, always wins in the room. And when, like I said, when you can think clearly, speak with authority, and be present under pressure, that makes you not just impossible to ignore, but also that makes your judgment clear. And that's what AI cannot replicate. And I would say, at the end of the day, this is the only thing that we have left in the world that AI is rising.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on UnCeiling You. I really appreciate you being here and lending your voice to the audience. And we'll have some information about where they can find you in order to get a hold of your framework on thinking clearly.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's been an honor to be here.
Pav just gave you something most leadership conversations never offer: permission to reclaim your own thinking, not by working harder, by building the habit of knowing what you actually think before you open the machine, before you walk into the room, before the pressure decides for you. Here's where this connects with everything we talk about on this show. The trust tax doesn't just take your time, it takes your clarity. When you've been the system for long enough, you stop knowing where your thinking ends and the system needs to begin. You start performing certainty you don't have, outsourcing conclusions you should own, and wondering why, after all that output, you still feel like something essential is missing. What's missing is you. You're unedited, unprompted, not yet AI polished judgment. That's not gone. It's just been quiet. You can start reclaiming it today before you generate the email. What do you actually want to say? Before you open the report, what do you already know? Before you agree to carry the thing that just landed on your desk, was it ever actually yours to carry? Should somebody else carry it instead? Small questions, real ownership, that's where this starts. If today's conversation landed somewhere, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to go deeper, to name the patterns, redesign the load, and build a career that runs on your terms, come find me. Links are in the show notes. You don't have to push harder. You have to see more clearly. I'm Dr. Natalie Luke, and this is the UnCeiling You podcast. See you next time.